So today we're going to be talking about 3D in After Effects, though to be fair, 3D in After Effects isn't really true 3D. It's really more 2.5D. And the reason we call it 2.5D is because when we make something 3D, it does not have depth to it. It's still a flat object, but in a three-dimensional space. You've actually kind of already seen this if you've played with the obsolete 3D command. And so what we're going to be doing is more complicated than that, but the theory is similar. Whereas if I went to obsolete 3D, basic 3D, you've probably already played with swivel and tilt. And basically you have this paper-thin text or image that you can rotate into oblivion. That's pretty much how 3D works in this program. Obsolete 3D, we have very limited controls, but the result is very similar. So I still recommend this if you're just looking for something simple or have a computer that can't handle the techniques I'm about to show you. So to make a layer 3D or 2.5D in After Effects, all you have to do is click on this little cube underneath this cube indicator on the layer. And if you don't see that, you just have to click toggle switches modes until that you don't see track matte. So you just want to see the little switches here. And this last one, the cube, means 3D. So I can make both of these layers 3D. I have some text, and I have my background JPEG, and nothing really happens. Oh, my text went away. Other than that, the only other thing that's happened is I have 3 axes handles now instead of 2. And also, if I turn this on and off again, let's just take a look at the properties. If I twirl down transform, everything looks normal. But when I turn on 3D, position, anchor point, scale, orientation, everything gets a third digit, okay? And that's because it's the Z axes. So we've been used to X, that's left and right. So if I do position, the first number is X, that's your horizontal placement. Y is the second one. You've had those this whole time, but now we have the Z axes. And Z is depth. Okay, so Z is how close or far it is from us. And in this case, we're a camera. So if I push the Z index back, it basically just looks like I'm changing scale, but I'm actually pushing this background further away from me. Okay, same thing with my text. My text is now 3D. I have these handles on it that also indicate the 3 different axes. So green is Y. If I drag that, that's just up and down. I'm going to go to half resolution because even just doing this is bogging my computer down. I also have X, which is left and right and horizontal. Then Z is hard, X is hard to see because it's actually pointing at me, or Z. So it's this blue one. And these colors, by the way, transfer into pretty much all programs I could think of. It's Cinema 4D, Element, other things as well. So when you're playing with 3D, it really doesn't look like anything other than scale, okay? It doesn't look like scale until you actually start applying cameras or looking at it from multiple views. So before I add a camera, if I go to a multi-view look, right now it says 1 view down here. Anytime I'm working with 3D layers, I like to work in 2 views horizontal, just because placing things is that much more difficult now. And if I do 2 views horizontal, I like using active camera as my main view, but now this one is a top-down view. And what you're actually looking at is this is the brick wall, and this is the text. We're just looking down at them. So it's almost like looking at a flat sheet of paper from above, okay? So if I wanted to move the text back, I can actually do it from this view as well. And you can see if I push it back, it really just is perceived as scale over here, okay? Layer order does not matter once you start playing with 3D. The Z index does, just like it does with web design. So if I push this text behind the brick wall, it's actually going to disappear because it's behind this wall. Okay, so you have the Z index now that overwrites any stacking order. And when you push things further away, they're usually going to have to get bigger in order to fill in the background. So I'm just going to click S for scale and just scale that up a little bit. Now to really get the true benefit of using 3D, we need 2 other layer types. We need a camera in order to navigate around and see this from different point of views. and we need light in order to perceive depth. Okay, first I'm just going to talk about the cameras. I'm going to go back to just one view for a moment. And this looks like a regular graphic. There's really nothing to indicate visually this is 3D. I'm going to go to my layer menu and choose New Camera. And the digital camera in After Effects is one of its coolest features. There's a few different camera types, 1 or 2 node. There's different presets of different millimeters of film. You can choose the film size, the focal length, the zoom, the angle of view. You can even enable depth of field, which is arguably one of the most powerful techniques in this program. Basically, if you've shot with like a DSLR and you know that things are in focus are crisp, things that are out of focus become soft, you can simulate that digitally with this camera, which is pretty awesome, though it adds a lot of render time. I'm not going to worry about these settings just yet. I'm actually just going to click OK. It adds a camera as a layer type to my document. And if I needed to edit something about that camera, I could just double click on it and I get all those settings again. Now the camera allows us to change our view in After Effects, and we've always been working with something called active camera. There's a default camera that's the thing that renders. We just can't control it. We can only control the view if we add a camera. And this camera, if I go back to 2 views, this isn't something that renders, but you can actually see it visibly over here. This is my camera body. It has 3 handles, X, Y, and Z. It's a 3D object. It really only works with 3D layers. There's no reason to add it to a non-3D composition. And basically, its placement is going to determine the visibility over here. So if I move the camera forward, you're going to see it's like we're getting closer to our text and background. Okay, so this camera is actually the thing controlling our view at this point. The camera itself has quite a few parts. If I twirl down Transform, it has what you would expect, like position, orientation, and rotation. Something that you probably haven't seen before is point of interest. And the things I'm going to be telling you about the camera pretty much apply to the light as well. The lights work in a very similar way, where their body is one place, that's over here, and point of interest is kind of what they're pointing at. The point of interest is represented as an anchor point. And so I could either move that here by moving it around, or I could just click and drag on it up here. And the point of interest is basically the direction of the camera. Okay? Then we have position, X, Y, and Z, so you can see the body moving in that top-down view. And then we have things like orientation, so I could rotate the camera. You can see there's kind of a cube in the top view that represents the field of view. And then I have Y rotation and Z rotation. So there's a lot of different things we can do with this camera, which make it pretty fun to use. For animation, I actually usually just turn on the stopwatch for position and point of interest. That's normally all you have to do. And we're not going to see too much depth with this, just because we have just 2 objects. But if I wanted to do a really basic animation of using the camera, let's just say I wanted to just do a little rotation, I would set the stopwatches for point of interest and position, and then I'm just going to move forward in time, and let's say I want this to zoom in a little bit, and I want the point of interest to sweep this way. I know it's going to go off the screen a little, but you can see if I go back, it's actually animating very slowly this camera animation. So the camera is kind of another thing we can animate, and it dictates the visibility of what we're animating. Now, this can lead to a lot of really interesting results. I have a folder in practice files called 3D, and in that folder I've added 3 PSDs that I've already split up and separated. I just made a new one today that might look familiar to you. But what's different about it this time is I've actually made it into a 3D layer. And remember, 3D in this case just means flat layers. But what's interesting about this with my camera is another way you can work with the camera is using this thing called the Unified Camera tool. It's located in the toolbar right next to Pan Behind, which we've been using for our anchor points. And Unified Camera, you've got Unified Camera, which moves everything, Orbit, which rotates, Track, which is just X and Y, and Z, which is just depth. So if I do Orbit Camera tool and just kind of rotate a little, you could kind of see the depth I've created in this photo by separating things along the z-index. Okay, so I've just kind of created, I usually think of like almost like a diorama type of thing. You know, you've got these flat objects in a shoebox, and it just allows us to do really basic animation that has just a little bit more depth to it that we normally don't have. You see a technique like this used a lot on like the History Channel and PBS. They'll take old historical photos, break them down into foreground, midground, background, and then animate them in After Effects. So I simulated that using just this little kitten picture here. And the main benefit of getting this is that you get parallax, so you get different movement in the background versus the foreground, which is a really nice technique. So I just have this animation here that unfortunately I don't think it's going to let me play back because this computer is not having any of this. I think it's more of a dog person, but that's all right. More on this in just a moment. I'm going to go back to this other comp. And this text, honestly, the text movement or the camera movement could also be faked just by moving an asset around. So we saw that Conan O'Brien example. That could be a camera going over the 3D surface, or it could be the 3D surface rotating and changing scale. So here I have kind of a pan going on with this brick surface, but you guys already know that I could also simulate something like that just by animating this surface moving left to right. So if you don't want to use a camera, there's other ways of kind of creating that kind of look, especially if your image is bigger. But cameras have so many different benefits, and aside from being able to move through and past objects, the other thing it lets us do is really play off of lighting and depth. And we're going to get more into 3D as the time goes on. This is really just an introduction to it. But to really play off of the 3D layers, you need not only a camera, which is just what we're viewing through, but also lighting. And lights are just another layer type. So we add them by going Layer, New, Light. And there's multiple light types. There's Spot, Parallel, Point, and Ambient. For now, we're just going to focus on Spot. That's the default. And with this, I can choose different colors, intensity, cone angle, which you'll see visibly in a moment. I can choose whether or not it casts shadows, which I want. Otherwise, I can click OK. And you can see that by doing this, I actually get shadow on my screen. So lights, like camera, only work with layers that are 3D. If I turn off the 3D on these two layers, you can see they go back to being how they looked before. So both of these techniques only work with layers that have been determined to be 3D. And I should undo rather than redoing that. There we go. So my camera is this guy down here, the square with this big thing coming off of it. My light is this little guy. So it also has the 3-pronged handle. I can move this around in either view. Instead of a point of interest, you just kind of have what it's looking at. And then the cone is the shape coming off of the light. If you've ever worked in theater or seen a play before, it's almost like the size of the spotlight. So if I want to change this, I would just double click on light, just like we could camera. And here I could bring the cone angle down. You can see I can make that much more of a pinpoint kind of thing. So I can change that. I can also increase the shadow darkness, diffusion. I can even change the light color, which actually does a lot to the scene. Okay, so if you want to animate like a little mini rave, because I'm sure that's what everybody's thinking right now. If I twirl down my light options, we have intensity. We've got basically all those things that when we double click, we have access to, but now we've got stopwatches next to them. So if I want this color to change over time, I could just click my stopwatch and it will actually tween between those different colors. So instead of using like hue and saturation, using a colored light would be an interesting way of kind of changing the look of your whole scene. If you think back to the very first week of school, I showed you I Say Fever, that music video with like the cutout people and the animals. No? I know I did. I'll just show you again later, but all the lights in that are done just in After Effects. And so it's kind of cool that we can have these light changes and things occur. Regardless of this illuminating my object, it's really not casting any shadows, and that's one of the main reasons I want these lights for. This creates a nice vignette. You can see it shading my stuff, but I actually want a shadow on the background. The shadows can be a little bit tricky, but if you follow these steps, they shouldn't be too elusive. First, double-clicking on your light and make sure that Cast Shadows is checked on would be the first thing I would do. So we know that's not the culprit. The second thing would be making sure that there's actually depth in your image. So we need our text to be at a different z-index than our background. If two things are right on top of each other, there's not going to be any kind of shadow. So we know that's not the problem. The third and probably culprit element is actually looking at something called material options. Material options is something that added itself quietly to any layer with 3D on it. So if I twirl down my text in 2.5D, we've got text, we've got transform, but then there's something called material options. Okay, we'll come back to geometry options in a little bit. Material options, that's where Cast Shadows lives. So material options is something you only see when you make a layer 3D. And if I turn Cast Shadows on, now we actually have a shadow from our text. And if I move my light around, you can see that that will actually change where the shadow is and what it looks like. So it's cool because we actually can work with real, I'm doing air quotes, shadows within After Effects, which can add a lot of depth to a document. This shadow, I want to make sure it's turned on, and then I can do things like I can diffuse it. So if I want it to be a softer shadow, I can do that. I can diffuse the shadow if I scroll all the way down to the bottom here. Also remember that you've got these options if you double click on light. So if I want shadow darkness to be lighter, I can just kind of pull that down a little, and I can soften it by increasing the diffusion. So if I don't want it to be hard edge like the text, I can create, that's a little too soft. So I can add shadows and then soften it using my different lighting options. And what's cool about this is that I can animate the light. So before we were just animating our objects, but now we can add to our designs by also animating our cameras and our lights on top of that. So I would still do the workflow how you're doing. I would still animate your general objects, but then copy that composition and have one that's just meant for 3D. Turn your 3D layers on, pull them apart z-index wise, and then you could start animating your lights and things like that. So if I want to animate this light, for example, moving across the screen, I forgot I had the color change, so I'm just going to slide it over here and click P for position like I would any other object, and move forward in time, move it across. And what's cool is that like you get the shadow animation too. You get all those things to animate at once. Here I've got the lighting as well. I think I want to, the problem right here is that it's pointed this way instead, so it's not just position like camera. It works best to have the point of interest animated as well. So you can see what's going wrong from this top-down view. The body is animating, but the point of interest is always staying on this right-hand corner. And that's the same thing the camera would do as well. So I actually want to animate point of interest also. I want it to be like that, but then at the beginning I actually want it to move this way. So the point of interest and the position are two different things, and then I could have it moving across my text. And you can see it's animating the color, but then the shadow is automatically changing based on this animation. And man, this is working really slow, but you can see all the different things it's generating right now. So it's a pretty cool effect, and if it's too dark, you could always add other lights, or if you double click on your light, you can increase your cone angle. The bigger the cone angle, the more it will light. So if you don't want that dramatic vignette, just increase that. And let's see if we can actually get this to render in some way. I'm going to go down to 3rd resolution. And it's still like, It looks like this could be the intro to like some kind of cop drama. Could animate red and blue lights maybe. But material options, I can also determine how shiny this text is, how much it's bouncing back the light. Like there's just so many options in here that make this technique really fun to play with. It just takes a little bit of patience. There's obviously more moving parts. I would never do 3D without working from a multiple view angle because trying to determine the position of cameras and lights without it is really tough. Yeah, I didn't even RAM preview that. Oh, there we go. So that gives you a better idea. You kind of get this additional thing with the shadow. In fact, something that's kind of cool about the shadow is if you go to the material options where we turn on shadow options, it's not just on or off, it's also only. So if you have only shadows, it won't even render the original. It'll just have that shadow in the background, which is kind of cool. I've used that for different things before as well. So a lot of different options here with our lighting and our shadows. Also, it's important to point out that I made a background using this brick picture. 3D doesn't work against nothing. Like if I made a new background, let's make this white just for the sake of cleanliness. You can't see that white text, but it says shadow. And the edges just look rough because I have it in 3rd resolution. Let's go back up to half. So we probably want a slightly thicker font for this technique. So I'm just going to cycle through here to Arial Black. And so the steps, once again, remember, are to turn on the 3D layer capabilities. That's with the cube. Then I need to add a camera. And I need to add a light. I do not want that color of light though. If you know it's working if you see just kind of a gradation on your text. I should be seeing a shadow, but even if I went through all my steps right now, I still wouldn't see it because there's technically no background. Okay, there has to be something to catch the light. So what's a way that we can have stand-in pixels if we don't have any? Rhymes with solid.
Solid.
Yes. So if you want something really basic, you can't use just the composition background. It can't catch a shadow because it's not really there. So if I still want white, I would just go layer new solid, add a white solid, whereas before I had the bricks. Bring that to the back, make that 3D. We can tell it's working shadow-wise because it's part of the vignette, but we're still not getting a shadow. And there's 2 reasons for this. One is, remember, we have to go to our options under material options and make sure cast shadows is on. But even then it's not working. By the way, you don't need to have cast shadows on your wall element because you're not seeing behind it. I just need cast shadows for my subject. I did all of my steps, but I'm still not seeing my shadow. Skylar?
Do you need to add depth to it?
Yes. So that ding ding ding. Right now, if I look at a top view, my white solid and my text are on the exact same level. They're right in the middle here. So we don't see a shadow when things are at the same depth. I would just use white solid and push that back, and then we see our shadow. So there has to be a separation of your subjects in order for you to see a shadow. Think of like shadow puppets. Your hand is a certain distance from the wall. It doesn't work when your hand is like this. That's just a puppet show. It's the weirdest analogy I think I've done, at least today. And then normally when you push a background element, you just need to make it bigger. So it's a good thing to be aware of because you want something with high resolution. And then this is a top-down view, which is the default. I have a drop-down right here, right next to 2 views that I can actually do left, front, top, back. So if it's helpful to see this from a left view, here's the white solid. Here's the text. And you can see by moving that I could really change the shadow and then the light itself. So you really just get a better feel for where things are by working in this multiple view mode. It can be really, really handy for seeing stuff like this. And I just have this basic shadow. By the way, if you're just looking for a drop shadow, this would not be the way to do it. This is a lot of steps for just a drop shadow. If I turn my light and camera off, you can see that all goes away. I think I've shown this before, but if you just want a little more emphasis and don't want to play with cameras and light, there is a basic drop shadow, and it's just under Effect Simulation. I'm sorry, not simulation, generate. It's under perspective, my God. I always forget where it is. Perspective seems like a weird place, but Effect, Perspective, Drop Shadow. And let me turn off the 3D here. I have a stroke apparently as well. So drop shadow literally just adds a drop shadow like you would expect. If I go back to one view and click on this, I can change the distance, the shadow, and even with this I could say shadow only, which is kind of cool. But if you're just looking for a drop shadow, it's under perspective. Drop shadows aren't good for creating realistic techniques because it really just works in kind of a design sensibility or world. Last thing I want to talk about today is just working with these 3D images. I have 3 different examples that you can play with. You can also make an example of your own. I would definitely do asset preparation here. So as an example, this kitten one is broken up into multiple layers. And I did these multiple layers in Photoshop. So basically I just use a series of masks to isolate each individual part. And the way you would break it down would be totally up to you, but I recommend foreground, midground, background as a minimum. So I have 3 different PSDs you can play with. The thing that gets tricky is you can't have any gaps. Like, backgrounds are always the hardest because, you know, we're only seeing part of the background. I was actually able to make this background using a technique called content-aware deletion. Okay, and I use that for all my other examples too. Let me show you what I mean. So I created this just before class. I also have one based on Starry Night that I've already prepared. So the tree is separate, the city is separate, the hills are separate, and then the sky. And same thing with the sky. You can see it's not perfect, but I used content-aware deletion for it. You can't have any gaps because then when you move your camera around in After Effects, if I go to my unified camera tool here, you know, we need to be able to, we're going to see down below here, but we don't want there to be like a gap in the background where the kittens were. Okay, so I had to fill that area in. And I could have separated the kittens too, but come on. That would have been crazy. So the way that I did that, if you want to play with your own files, is, oh, and then the dinosaur one. This is my oldest example. So if you want to play with this one too, you can. And let me just show you what both of these look like real quick. I mentioned I have these in a folder called 3D. These are layered PSD files. So remember, when you bring them in, you want to bring them in as composition. Retain layer sizes. Then I could just double click on the comp it creates. And then what's nice is all of my layers are ready to go. Okay, so the way I'd set up something like this is I'm just going to select all, make 3D, go to my multiple camera view, and then just start separating stuff. So like I want this shrub to be more in the foreground. I need to zoom out a little bit. So I'm looking at a top-down view right here. I'm just going to pull this shrub to the foreground. I'm going to take background and push it back. And just like with all the other examples I've done, I'm also going to need to scale that up. And I don't want anything really on the same level. I'm going to bring the T-Rex forward. I've got this second shrub I'm going to bring forward. This just is called background image. If you want to rename a layer, just click on it and hit return. I'm going to call this Shrub Junior because I can. And then Triceratops, I'll bring him forward. So you can see I'm staggering the layers here. I've got different orders of things. And then once I go in with my camera, I'm going to go back to just one view so we can see this better. Without animating or anything, I could just show you, now we have this kind of diorama type feeling. So it's not like it's an infinite effect. We can only move the camera so much. But we can create some kind of cool effects this way. Alex?
Could you take the background and bend it?
Mm-hmm. I'll get to that.
Okay.
Not today, but yes, you could create kind of a panoramic background using After Effects. And so the same thing with the Starry Night picture. This one I just put together using different things within that I grabbed off the internet. But if you have an actual photo and you don't want gaps, let me just show you how I did that in case you don't know. So I'm going to copy the background again, and I'm going to hide all the other layers by option clicking on this eyeball. So I want to create a pure background layer, but there's not a lot of background here. So this technique, you don't need to have a very good selection. You actually want it to not be too tight to your object. You want to actually kind of have a border around the thing you're deleting. I already made a selection that I'm just going to load. That was not the selection. That would be the lamest selection ever. Is that really the only? Oh no, there it is. So I actually used selections that I'd already made, like the kittens one. If you command click on a mask, you can load it as a selection. So I did a variation of this, but then I expanded it using select transform selection. But I actually expanded it because you don't want it to be too tight. I actually had to go and increase this because I wanted to get around all the whiskers and stuff. And obviously right now, if I just hit delete, that doesn't really work so well, okay? Instead, I want to do shift delete. And when you do shift delete in Photoshop, it brings up content aware deletion. It also does this when you're on a locked background layer, but I never work with the locked background layer. I leave that original. So if you do shift delete, you can do content aware deletion, or filling in this case. And if you click OK, it actually basically just looks at the surrounding pixels and does its best guess. So it's never perfect. You can see there's definitely a repeating pattern here. I can go in with my clone or healing brush and fix that. But my subject's going to be in the way anyways. Here I'm just able to get a nice clean background. In video I call this a clean plate, having a background without any subjects in it. And then I'm able to kind of work how I would normally. So content aware deletion, if you haven't played with it, really awesome technique in Photoshop. And it's really ideal for making these backgrounds that we have deleted elements in. So in a nutshell, that's 3D. We're going to be talking more about this in upcoming classes. I just wanted to show you kind of the gist of it with the layers and then using depth, cameras, and lights in order to get a new technique and add depth into After Effects.